नाटक रेडियो सुनने वाले सभी श्रोताओं को विकास दुर्गा का नमस्कार। पिछले 1 साल से हर हफ्ते हम आपके लिए कुछ नई कहानियां, किस्से, नाटक और संगीत लेकर आ रहे हैं। What started off as a humble attempt to bring the feel of Hava Mahal on podcasts is now a global phenomenon. Natak Radio has been heard in over 65 different countries and more than 1,000 cities across the world. From Ghumarvi in Himachal Pradesh to Leicester in the UK. भारत की सिलिकॉन वैली बंगलुरु से अमेरिका की सिलिकॉन वैली सैन फ्रांसिस्को तक। हमारी पेरेंट कंपनी नाटक की ही तरह नाटक रेडियो भी एक ओपन प्लेटफॉर्म है। If you'd like to participate in Natak Radio, want to interact with us, would like to read or have us read a certain story or radio play, please write to us at radio@natak.org. That's radio@naatak.org. Until then, keep adding drama to your life with Natak Radio. This week on Natak Radio, we present Dhumketu's Post Office, performed by Kartic Bhargav.
In the grey sky of early dawn, stars still glowed, just like happy memories light up a life that is nearing its close. An old man was walking through the town, now and again drawing his tattered clothes tighter to shield his body from the cold and biting wind. From some houses came the sound of grinding mills and the sweet voices of women singing at their chores, and these sounds really helped him along his lonely way. Except for the occasional bark of a dog, the distant steps of a workman going early to work, or the screech of a bird disturbed before its time, the whole town was wrapped in deathly silence. Most of its inhabitants were still in the arms of sleep, the sleep which grew more and more profound on account of the intense winter cold. For the cold used sleep to extend its sway over all things, just as a false friend lulls his chosen victim with caressing smiles. The old man, shivering at times but of fixed purpose, plodded on till he came out of the town gate onto a straight road. Along this, he now went at a somewhat slower pace, supporting himself on his old staff. On one side of the road was a row of trees, and on the other side, the town's public garden. At the end of the garden stood a handsome building of the newest style, and the light gleamed through its crevices of closed doors and windows. Beholding the wooden arch of the building, the old man was filled with joy that a pilgrim feels when he first sees his destination. On the arch hung an old board with newly painted letters, Post Office. The old man went in quietly and squatted on the veranda. The voices of 2 or 3 people, busy at their routine work, could be faintly heard through the wall. "Police Superintendent?" a voice called sharply. The old man started at the sound, but composed himself again to wait. But for the faith and love that warmed him, he could not have borne this bitter cold. Name after name rang out from within as the clerk read out the English addresses in the letters and flung them to the waiting postman. From long practice, he had acquired great speed at reading out the titles: Commissioner, Superintendent, Diwan Sahib, Librarian, and in flinging the letters out. In the midst of this procedure, a jesting voice from inside called, "Coachman Ali?" The old man got up, raised his hand to heaven in gratitude, and stepped forward and put his hands on the door. "Gokul bhai?" "Yes, who is there?" "You called out Coachman Ali's name, didn't you? Here I am. I have come for my letter." "It's a madman, sir, who worries us every day by calling for letters that never come," said the clerk to the postmaster. The old man slowly went back to the bench on which he had been accustomed to sit for 5 long years. Ali had been a clever shikari. As his skill increased, so did his love for the hunt, till at last it was as impossible for him to pass a day without hunting as it was for the opium eater to forego his daily portion. When Ali sighted the earth-brown partridge, almost invisible to the other eyes, the poor bird, they said, was as good as in his bag. His sharp eyes saw the rabbit that was crouching. Even when the dogs failed to see the creature cunningly hidden in the yellow-brown scrub, Ali's eyes would catch the sight of its ears, and in another moment, it was dead. Besides this, he would also often go out with his friends, the fishermen. But when the evening of his life was drawing in, he left his old ways and suddenly took a new turn. His only child Miriam married and left him. She went off with a soldier into his regiment in Punjab. And for the last 5 years, he had no news of this daughter, for whose sake alone he dragged along a cheerless existence. Now he understood the meaning of love and separation. He could no longer enjoy the sportsman's pleasure and laughter at the bewildered terror of the young partridges bereft of their parents. He reflected deeply and came to the conclusion that the whole universe is built up through love and that grief and separation are inescapable. The day he realized this, he sat down under a tree and wept bitterly. From the next day, he had risen each morning at 4 o'clock to walk to the post office. In his whole life, he had never received a letter. But with devout serenity, born out of hope and faith, he persevered and was always the first to arrive. The post office, one of the most uninteresting buildings in the world, became his place of pilgrimage. He always occupied a particular seat at a particular corner of the building. And when people got to know his habit, they laughed at him. The postmen began to make a game out of him. Even though there was no letter for him, they would call out his name for the fun of seeing him jump up and come to the door. But with a boundless faith and infinite patience, he came every day and went away empty-handed. While Ali waited, peons would come in for their firm's letters and he would hear them discussing their master's scandals. These smart young peons in their spotless turbans and creaking shoes were always eager to express themselves. Meanwhile, the door would be thrown open and the postmaster, a man with a face as sad and as inexpressive as a pumpkin, would be sitting on his chair inside. There was no glimmer of animation in his features, and such men usually proved to be village schoolmasters, office clerks, or postmasters. One day he was there as usual and did not move from his seat when the door was opened. "Police Commissioner," the clerk called out, and a young fellow stepped forward briskly for the letters. "Superintendent," another voice called, and another peon came. And so the clerk, like a worshipper of Vishnu, repeated his customary 1,000 names. At last they had all gone. Ali got up too and, saluting the post office as though it housed some precious relic, went off. A pitiable figure, a century behind his time. "That fellow?" asked the postmaster. "Is he mad?" "Who, sir?" "Oh, yes," answered the clerk. "No matter what the weather is, he's been here every day for the last 5 years, but he doesn't get many letters." "Of course, who does he think will have the time to write a letter every day?" "But he's a bit touched, sir. In the old days he committed many sins, and maybe he shed some blood within sacred precincts and is paying for it now," the postman added in support of his statement. "Madmen are strange people," the postmaster said. "Oh yes, sir. Once I saw a postman in Ahmedabad who did absolutely nothing but make little heaps of dust. And another had a habit of going to the riverbed in order to pour water on a certain stone every day." "Oh, that's nothing," chimed in another. "I knew one madman who paced up and down all day long. Another who never ceased declaiming poetry. And a third who would slap himself on the cheek and then begin to cry because he was being beaten." And everyone in the post office began to talk of lunacy. All working class people have this habit of taking periodic rests by joining in the general discussion for a few minutes. After listening a while, the postmaster got up and said, "It seems as though the madmen live in the world of their own making. To them, perhaps, we too appear mad. The madman's world is rather like the poet's, I should think." He laughed as he spoke the last few words, looking at one of the clerks who wrote poetry. And then he went out and the whole office became silent again. For several days, Ali had not come to the post office. There was no one with enough sympathy or understanding to guess the reason, but all were curious to know what had stopped the old man. At last, he came again, but it was a struggle for him to breathe, and on his face were clear signs of approaching end. That day, he could not contain his impatience. "Master Sahib," he begged the postmaster, "have you a letter from my Miriam?" The postmaster had an urgent errand to tend to and was in a hurry. "What a pest you are, bhai," he exclaimed. "My name is Ali," answered Ali absent-mindedly. I know, but do you think we've got your Miriam's name registered?" "Oh, then please note it down, bhai. It will be useful if a letter should come when I am not here." For how should the villager, who had spent 3/4 of his life hunting, know that Miriam's name was not worth even a paisa to anyone but her father? The postmaster was beginning to lose his temper. "Have you no sense? Do you think we are going to eat your letter when it comes?" And walked off hastily. Ali came out very slowly, turning after every few steps to gaze at the post office. His eyes were filled with tears of helplessness, for his patience was exhausted, even though he still had faith. Yet how could he still hope to hear from Miriam? Ali then heard one of the clerks coming up behind him and turned to him now. "Bhai," he said. The clerk was surprised, but being a decent fellow, he said, "Yes?" "Here, look at this." And Ali produced an old tin box and emptied 5 golden coins into the surprised clerk's hands. "Do not look so startled," he continued. "They will be useful to you, and they can never be to me. But will you do one thing?" "What?" "What do you see up there?" asked Ali, pointing to the sky. "Heaven." "Allah is there, and in His presence I am giving you this money. When it comes, you must forward my Miriam's letter to me." "But where am I supposed to send it?" asked the utterly bewildered clerk. "To my grave." "What?" "Yes, it's true. Today is my last day, my very last. And I have not seen Miriam. I have had no letter from her." There were tears in Ali's eyes as the clerk slowly left him and went on his way with the 5 golden coins in his pocket. Ali was never seen again, and no one troubled to inquire after him. One day, trouble came to the postmaster. His daughter lay ill in another town, and he was anxiously waiting for news of her. The post was brought in, and the letters were piled on the table. Seeing an envelope of the color and shape he expected, the postmaster eagerly snatched it up. It was addressed to coachman Ali. He dropped it immediately as though he had received an electric shock. The haughty temper of the official had quite left him in his sorrow and anxiety, and had laid bare his human heart. He knew at once that this was the letter the old man had been waiting for. It must be from his daughter Miriam. "Lakshmidas," called the postmaster, for that was the name of the clerk to whom Ali had given his money. "Yes, sir." "This is for your coachman Ali. Where is he now?" "I'll find out, sir." The postmaster did not receive his own letter all that day. He worried all night, and then getting up at 3, went to sit in the office. When Ali comes at 4 o'clock, he mused, I will give him the letter myself. For now, the postmaster understood Ali's heart. After spending but a single night in suspense, anxiously waiting for the news of his daughter, his heart was brimming with sympathy for the poor old man who had spent his nights in the same suspense for the last 5 years. At the stroke of 5, he heard a soft knock on the door. He felt sure it was Ali. He rose up quickly from his chair, his suffering father's heart recognizing another, and flung the door wide open. Come in, Brother Ali, he cried, handing the letter to the meek old man, bent double with age, who was standing right outside. Ali was leaning on a stick, and the tears were wet on his face, just as they had been when the clerk had left him. But his features had been hard then, and now they were softened by lines of kindliness. He lifted his eyes, and in them was a light so heavenly that the postmaster shrank back in fear and astonishment. Lakshmidas had heard the postmaster's words, and he came towards the office from another quarter. Who was that, sir? Old Ali? He asked. But the postmaster took no notice of him. He was staring with wide open eyes at the doorway from which Ali had disappeared. Where could he have gone? At last he turned to Lakshmidas. Yes, I was speaking to Ali, he said. Old Ali is dead, sir, but you can give me his letter. What? But when? Are you sure, Lakshmidas? Yes, that is so, broke in a postman who had just arrived. Ali died 3 months ago. The postmaster was bewildered. Miriam's letter was still lying near the door, and Ali's image was still before his eyes. He listened to Lakshmidas's recital of the last interview, but he still could not doubt the reality of the knock on the door and the tears in Ali's eyes. He was perplexed. Had he really seen Ali? Had his imagination deceived him? Or had it just perhaps been Lakshmidas? The daily routine began once again. The clerk read out the addresses. Police commissioner, superintendent, librarian, and flung the letters deftly. But the postmaster now watched them as eagerly as though each contained a warm, beating heart. He no longer thought of them in terms of envelopes and postcards. He saw the essential human worth of a letter. That evening, Lakshmidas and the postmaster walked slowly to Ali's grave. They laid the letter on it and turned back. Lakshmidas, were you indeed the first to come to the office in the morning? Yes, sir, I was the first. Then, how? I don't understand. What is it, sir? Oh, never mind, the postmaster said tersely. At the office, he parted from Lakshmidas and went in. The newly awakened father's heart in him was reproaching him for having failed to understand Ali's anxiety. For now he himself had to spend another night of restless anxiety. Tortured by doubt and remorse, he sat down in the glow of the charcoal cigarette to wait.